everybody, and welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, welcome. I'm Amber Rose, also known as the Religious Hippie. You can basically follow me on any social media platform, or you can go straight to my website at thereligioushippie.com. So today's another fun video. I decided to just do a Q&A because I feel like I've done a lot of live stream Q&As, which I love doing because I get to interact with you guys in real time and I get to answer your guys' questions in real time. So that's awesome. But at the same time, I love doing these types of videos where you guys ask me questions and I do a specific video about it so that my answers are a little more thought out and I can think of more in-depth things to talk to you guys about that might help you. So without further ado, we are just going to jump right in. Also, if you guys are not following me on Instagram, that is usually where I do these types of things. I do regular Q&As, live streams, etc. on Instagrams. So make sure you're following me there in order to kind of keep up with that and that type of thing. Okay, so our first question is from DMCS, and they ask, how did you start your walk with God? Have you been a Catholic since birth, or did he call you later on? I don't think I've talked about my conversion story on here at all, almost. Maybe I've mentioned it a few times here or there, but I don't think I've actually ever gone in depth, so buckle up, kids. This is going to be a fun ride. I realize I just said conversion story, but it's reversion story. I am a Cradle Catholic, but I was born and raised a Catholic, so I was a Cradle Catholic. I was baptized at a Novus Ordo parish, and so was my sister. I think we were baptized at the same parish. And growing up, we would go to the traditional Latin Mass. Now, the TLM is something my father grew up going to when he was a child in Chicago. He used to go to the parish called St. John of God, but that was shut down, I think, in the 80s. I don't really remember. They kind of took down the church and then merged it with another church called St. Michael's. And I don't know where it is now. But it was really important for my dad that my sister and I were raised Catholic and that we grew up going to the Mass that he went to as a child, because it was kind of like this family tradition. It honored his mom, and it was just like a really great way for Katie and I to be introduced into the traditional world and like the beauty of it and everything like that. I will say we also went to a Novus Ordo parish for a little while, and that's actually where I had my reversion, but we'll get to that in a minute. I basically had the best of both worlds. I had a Novus Ordo parish, I had a TLM parish, but unfortunately I hated Mass as a child. I hated wearing a veil. I wasn't disruptive necessarily, but I was extremely bored. We always sat in the back. I could never see. It was really hard to hear the priest, and most of the time we went to 7:30 a.m. low Mass. So it was very quiet, very dark. I was tired, and most of the time I slept through Mass. It was very rarely that I would actually stay awake through the whole thing, unless like my mom was like tugging on me to stay awake, or I was sitting next to my dad. But I got my first Holy Communion and my confirmation. I just kind of remember being very defiant as a child. I was very scared of confession. I was really afraid of I was a very scared child. I was afraid of like everything. And most of my friends weren't Catholic, or if they were Catholic, it usually wasn't traditional Latin Mass Catholic. They were usually Novus Ordo Catholic, which to me as a child didn't really make much sense as to why there should be any issues there, but a lot of their parents had issues with it, and they would call us rad trads, and it really caused a lot of division between the friends that I had and the church. And obviously I would prefer to keep my friends as opposed to going to church, because as a kid you're like, oh well, I want to keep my friendships. Like your mind is not on eternal things, and normally part of that could be blamed on the parents for not raising the child correctly. But I was raised going to TLM. I got the best catechesis known to Catholics. I mean, I was taught by a priest, so I can't really use that excuse, But as time went on, I got older. I was probably around maybe 11 or 12, and I started getting really bad rib pains whenever I would go into a church, like really bad, like rib dislocating. It made me nauseous. I wanted to faint. I wanted to throw up. It was just really, really bad. And I had no idea why, because it only started when we would go to church. We would step over the threshold, boom, just like that. My entire body would just be recoiling. And keep in mind, at this time, I was in mortal sin because I had just been introduced to pornography at this point in my life. So I have no doubt that it was spiritual, but I really wanted to be out of church. I wanted to text my friends. I wanted to stay overnight at their house, doing sleepovers and not have to go to Mass in the morning. There were just a lot of things that I wanted to do that I felt like Mass got in the way of, or that the Catholic Church in general got in the way of, with rules and things like that. It was around when I was officially 12 that I actually fell away from the church. And it was because of all those things. I didn't really understand eternal life. I didn't really understand the importance of it. I didn't understand the sacraments. I didn't understand the rules. It just felt really rigid and like they were trying to control me. And I'm sure a lot of people have those thoughts. I probably was not in the minority, but I was one of those kids that I didn't really have a community there. I didn't have very many friends. And the friends that I did have were really bad influences on me, unfortunately. And they were mainly Protestant, but there were also some Catholics who were just Catholic in name only. And because they were Catholic, I was like, oh, well, just, if you're Catholic, right? But turns out there are prerequisites to be a Catholic, and you can't be, pro-choice, and there's a bunch of stuff. And so I was led down a very different path because of my peers. And because I was obsessed with just the most meaningless things, but I was obsessed with, beauty and modeling and boys and just being popular and wanting to fit in, etc., that I kind of threw everything else to the side. And people usually ask me, well, if you were that young, did your parents fall away too? Yes, they technically did. That's why I didn't go to church anymore. But I wasn't upset about it. I was actually quite happy that we had fallen away from the church because for me, that meant freedom. And I was very, very happy about that. So this went on for about 8 years. I had a pornography and masturbation addiction. I constantly was in and out of horrible relationships that basically they objectified me, but I also didn't do anything to not be objectified. So I would allow them to objectify me through the things that I wore, through the way I talked, through my actions. And then I'd be like, oh, I hate being objectified. Like, I can't believe people just don't respect me and blah, blah, blah. But I never demanded respect. I never demanded that they treat me better. And most of the time I was an instigator for most of those things because it was attention. And to me, any attention was good attention. So a lot of the times I would try to get attention from these men, and I would wear the most provocative outfits. I would wear bikinis, just really not great things. So yeah, this went on for about 8 years. And through those 8 years, my addictions just got worse. I was getting in with rougher crowds. I was hanging out with people who just genuinely were not good for me. And I will say, though, that despite the fact I was around my peers who were having sex outside of marriage, who were doing drugs, who were doing all that stuff and getting drunk, I didn't touch alcohol before I was 21. I never smoked or did any kind of drug, and I never had sex outside of marriage, which is a miracle in and of itself, because first of all, my father did raise me with very good morals as a woman, despite the fact that I did not exercise them all the time. But when it actually came to those things, I saw what it did to my peers, and I was like, I don't want that for myself. And now, unfortunately, a lot of them are either hospitalized or they're recovering from addictions, or they're still doing their addictions and they're running in gangs. And it's very sad to see these people that I grew up with just continue to destroy their lives. But that's beside the point. I was in some groups and I was getting severely bullied. I mean, I definitely deserved a part of it. There were a few situations where I knew what I was doing, but I cried victim. There were other situations that were completely out of my control, that people would make up rumors, people would spread things, people would share photos, people would just try and ruin my reputation or life without actually having any substantial evidence. And most of the stuff that they spread about me was not true. If it was true, I feel like I would be like, okay, well, still none of your business, but also valid. But there would be things that they would talk about that still till this day actually do go around the same group, which I find very funny. But during that time, there were a lot of different things that I would do that would make them assume those things about me. And looking back on that, I can't really blame them because I didn't really help myself in those situations. So I was bullied, which then caused my anxiety and my depression. I started an eating disorder because I had an eating disorder when I was like 13 because I just had to be the thinnest I could possibly be. People blame it on Barbies and Disney or whatever. And it's like, yeah, that's true. If you're constantly consuming that and you see that as the ideal body type, sure. But I never really got that with Barbies or Disney necessarily. It only started happening with social media, when I would see my peers post images of themselves and I'd be like, oh, why isn't my stomach that flat? Or why don't I have things. And it was really, really rough for me having social media, especially Instagram, because I would follow models, I would follow, health and fitness people, and I was severely underweight. I was 100 pounds for most of my life up until about a year and a half, 2 years ago. And that's like really underweight. So I still struggled with a lot of these things, even, coming into my faith. But I struggled with all that stuff, and it was really hard. I had self-harm issues, and it just kept spiraling. It kept getting worse. I didn't know who I could trust. My trust issues were out of control. I was getting paranoid because people would constantly talk about me. Like, it was very hard for me to know who I could trust. And people would actually create social media profiles of me just to drag me through the mud, which isn't really much different from today, but at least now it's for a good reason. And it really took its toll on me, and I was really, really mentally struggling with anxiety, depression, self-harm, eating disorders, all that stuff. But I also hid it very well. And multiple people who now know my story have come up to me and told me, they're like, I had no idea that this happened. And I'm like, well, that's kind of, I was a very private person in those days, and anything that was wrong, I hid from people because it was a survival mechanism. So I had been going through that for 8 years. And eventually, I always forget if it was summer or winter, but I'm almost positive it was the summertime. I basically just had this total mental breakdown, stayed in my bed for days, refused to get out. I barely ate. I barely drank any water. I wasn't talking to anybody. And of course, my best friend, John, who's my brother/best friend, we're not actually related, but we'd been best friends for years. He was really worried about me, and I didn't even respond to him. And it was really, really bad. And I remember specifically rolling over. And I specifically remember one day I woke up and I rolled over and I was like, oh, I have so much to do. Like, at this time I was in college. I had so much work to do. I had so much homework. And I looked and I saw that it was a Sunday. And I kind of like rolled over onto my back and I was like, Sunday, Sunday, Sunday. Okay. What do I do on a Sunday? And I was just kind of thinking, I'm like, what do I have to do? All this stuff. But then I thought about my childhood and I was like, well, what did my dad have us do on Sundays? And usually we would go to mass and then he would take us out to eat. And it was fun. It was a great time. But I also remembered those horrible times as a teenager where I just hated going to mass. I just loathed it because it just felt like it was getting in the way of everything else I wanted to do. But in that moment, I do believe it was a grace from God telling me and showing me that I have tried almost everything else to fill this God-sized hole in my heart, but there's nothing else. I've tried everything in the sense of worldly stuff. I've tried buying things, being popular, having friends. I've tried revenge, and nothing really worked. And so as a last resort, I was like, okay, you know what? I'm going to try this and see if maybe going to mass will actually fix all these issues that I have. So I got the only non-scandalous skirt I owned and the least scandalous top I had. And I went to church. I went to my childhood Novus Ordo Parish and I sat in the back, and the entire time I was just like, oh, I shouldn't be here. Like, people are obviously going to know that I don't belong here. And the entire time my head was just like screaming to get out of there because it was just so uncomfortable. And part of that was obviously the demons trying to get me to leave, but then also being in the presence of Almighty God. I mean, that's horrifying, especially knowing what I had done and knowing how sinful my life has been and how I left the one man who could have changed all of that, the ever-loving God who could have, helped me through all of that. Instead, I just rejected him. And I'd like to put in here too that during those 8 years, God was kind of in the back of my mind. I'd never completely forgotten about him. And many times, there were situations where I have a friend who I would just be in tears about because he thought he got a girl pregnant, and there was just this whole thing, and it was a lot for me to handle as a teenager. And I was just crying and crying, and I told God, I'm like, you have to help him. I can't help him anymore. This is too much. I can't do this anymore, because it was an emotionally draining friendship and it was very toxic. And so I basically just told God, I'm like, I don't know what else to do. And God ended up taking that from me. And so there were times throughout the 8 years that I did think about God and I did ask for his help, whether I knew of it or not. It was subconscious sometimes, but there were certain times like that. So anyways, I'm in the church and I'm kind of thinking about getting up to leave before communion because everybody gets up to go receive communion. So I'm like, oh, I can sneak out during that time. That's when during consecration, when the priest lifted Jesus up for transubstantiation, I felt the entire room just go completely blank. Like it was like everything was just put on pause. There was no noise. Everything was just frozen in time. And I was like, whoa, hello. And the priest had, Jesus like this. And I felt Jesus speak into my heart. He said, do you trust me? And I was like, hello, God? And he was like, do you trust me? And I was like, no, like I have gone through all of this crazy stuff. I don't understand why you'd make me suffer like this. I don't understand why I had to go through all of these things, why I'm struggling so much, blah, 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 blah. And like a patient father, he was listening, but then he said again, do you trust me? And I was like, no, like, didn't you hear what I just say? And then over and over and over again, he just kept asking, do you trust me? Do you trust me? Keep in mind at this time, while I was familiar with the Divine Mercy Chaplet and St. Faustina's Diary, I didn't really know a whole lot about it. At that time, I didn't know that Jesus, I trust in you was one of those phrases that St. Faustina uses, and that is a part of Divine Mercy. And that's one of the reasons why Divine Mercy is such a huge part of this ministry. But he just kept asking, do you trust me? And it was almost like he was chiseling away the stone cold parts of my heart, where I had just completely blocked out everything, everyone, and was not allowing any light in, any love in, any joy in. And I felt so much lighter. And when he finally cracked through, I said, I'll try. I was like, I will try to trust you. But that's honestly all he needed to start making complete changes in my life. I mean, from my friends deciding all of a sudden they no longer wanted to hang out with me, which was a very isolating, very lonely time. But I had also never been happier than when I was separated from people who were making my life miserable, to, realizing I had to completely purge my closet, stop watching pornography, stop all of that, stop watching immoral TV shows and movies, and reading immoral books like Sarah J. Maas, which I was obsessed with back in the day, but did not help my pornography addiction at all, because it's basically smut, which, if you guys don't know, that's basically that. But yeah, and ever since then, I have just been on this journey that God has put me in, and I've been trying to help people. So a lot of people then ask how the ministry got started. So while I was reverting back into the church and really making sure that this was an all-in thing, because it's either all in or not in at all, right? And I was not about to half-ass anything. It was either I am Catholic or I'm not, and I needed to make a decision. And keep in mind, up until this point, I'd bashed the Catholic Church consistently. I said I hated it. There were things wrong with the priests. There were things wrong with the Pope. There was this and that. I didn't like the church. And so it was a shock to my friends when I'm like, yeah, I'm Catholic. And they were like, but last week. And I'm like, yeah, well, it happens. But it was a huge change. And the ministry started because this was around 2019. I was looking for young Catholic influencers, I don't know, who were my age, who could maybe guide me into the church with their own stories and, what you're supposed to do as a young Catholic in the church, all that stuff. Unfortunately, I didn't find any, and I really didn't find any until I got on TikTok, and there was a little Catholic community on there. But I decided, well, maybe I can be that for other people, since there has to be other people out there who are like me, who don't have, someone to teach them about these things. So I decided to become that for other people. And that's how the ministry got started. I just posted a really crappy video. It was like really poor quality video of my rosary, Chick-fil-A, and my church at the time. And it just took off on TikTok. And overnight, I gained thousands and thousands of followers. And I really had to pray and discern about it, because I was like, this is happening really quickly. I'm still a baby Catholic myself. But as time went on and people started asking me questions, I then went and found the answers to them. So I was simultaneously learning about the faith while also evangelizing to others. And yeah, and it's just kind of taken off since then. And now there's the podcast and the YouTube channel and all the socials. And I give talks now. And it's just such a blessing to see where I started and where this ministry started, and seeing all the doors that God has opened. And it's only through the grace of God. I want to make that clear. A lot of people thank me for the ministry, and I do appreciate it. I appreciate the encouragement and the kindness, but truly it's only through Almighty God that this ministry exists, and that I'm still doing this, because it's His, it's not mine. And I'm just a tool in His hands. So I always just like to really make that clear. This is not mine. This is God's. So I always say all glory to God whenever somebody compliments or, says that this ministry has really helped them. Truly, it is all glory to God, because I would not be here without him. And yeah, so that was a really long answer to your question, but I've never really shared my testimony on here before, so I hope that helps. Okay, so let's get back in here. Charlotte asks, prayers to help increase trust in God. I have negative anxiety about the future. The two main ones you're going to want to pray is the surrender novena and then the litany of trust. Those two are going to be your best friend. And keep in mind that God will send you trials and things like that to test you, to see if you do rely on him, if you do trust him and things like that. So when you pray these prayers, expect for that to happen, but know that God is in control. And I think at the end of the day, yes, it does have to do with our free will, but I don't think a choice is necessarily bad if it's not a sin, right? If it's a sin, and if we're choosing sin, obviously that is bad, that is away from God. But if you're making a decision and it gives you anxiety, if you're not sinning, there's no reason to feel anxiety, because God will meet you where you are and he will be able to lead you to where you need to be. And I know it can be really stressful and crazy, so that's why I suggest those two. So, Litany of Trust and the Surrender Novena, those are going to be your best friend. Any concern for burnout? You give so much. You know what? I have had times where I have been burnt out, but I don't think people catch on to it because I've gotten really good at scheduling in breaks where when I feel like it, I can film up to 3 videos in one day, which usually takes about 8 hours. Yeah, it can take a lot of time. And then as I schedule them out, it allows me to have like a month break from YouTube or from whatever I need. So I've gotten really good at that because I have had burnout in the past, which has affected the ministry, where I had to take, I think it was like 3.5 or 4 months off of work because I was just so stressed with giving talks and traveling, from podcasting to doing YouTube videos every week to social media posts and live streams. It was just a lot. And now I have a way better kind of grasp on that. So it also has really helped that I synced my cycle to the ministry. I think for women, cycle syncing is super important. We need to pay attention to our cycle and make sure that we are listening to our bodies, because if I were to film a whole bunch of videos at my later luteal phase or whatever, I would have no energy. I wouldn't want to film at all, and it would just be a miserable time for all of us. So yeah, I think that's also important, but I've gotten a lot better at it, so hopefully not. Okay, next question. I recently began working at my parish. Should I start going to a different parish for confession? No, I don't think you should. My parish, everybody knows me. All the priests, all the ushers, everybody knows who I am by the sound of my voice. And honestly, it just kind of helps me stay more accountable in the sense of these people know me personally, but also it helps because these people understand me, right? They understand that I have a ministry. They understand what's going on in my personal life because my spiritual director is also a part of their order. And it really just helps me because they're more equipped to help me. I don't know if that makes sense. Because they know me, they can give me personal advice based off of who I am to help me with what I'm struggling with. Does that make sense? Does any of this make sense? Maybe I've been talking for too long. I don't know. But I don't think you should. I think it's a good thing if people know you and that they see you going to confession. I don't see a point of going to a different church. Okay, our next question is from Keen, and he asks, is it problematic if most of my prayer routine involves just speaking in my own words? No, that's not problematic at all. I mean, prayer is prayer, and if there's a specific way of praying, if there's a specific way of praying that you're drawn to as opposed to another way, I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I do think meditation is still very important, but some people cannot see images in their mind. My husband's like that. So instead, repeating vocal prayers and getting into that meditative mindset through vocal prayer is another way to do that. Now, again, I don't think using your own words is bad at all. I think that's really important. That's kind of where prayer journaling comes in. If you guys saw my prayer routine video that I posted a couple weeks ago, you'll see my updated prayer routine and tips on prayer journaling and how to start a prayer routine, all that stuff. But I will say, we should still obviously try other means of prayer as well. Go to adoration. You probably already do that. I don't know. But going to adoration, doing some meditative prayer, all that's still really important as well. But you're not doing anything wrong either, So, yeah, if it works for you, don't try and fix something that's not broken. Is it okay to pray the rosary without knowing the mysteries? So the whole point of the rosary is the mysteries, so technically no. You need to know the mysteries in order to pray the rosary. Now, they're pretty easy to memorize. You can start with one. I think the most easy one to start with is usually the joyful mysteries. I personally memorized the sorrowful mysteries first because those were the ones I prayed the most. But you do have to know the mysteries in order to meditate and pray on them, because the rosary is a meditative prayer, and the whole point is that we're meditating on the life of Christ. So you do have to know the prayers in order to pray the rosary. But I have a PDF on my website of the rosary that I made, so I'll link that below for you guys. I know some people said they had issues with the PDF, but a majority of people don't. I think it has to do with the browser, or if you're on your phone or not. I don't really know. If you're on your phone, the PDF won't completely load, but there will be a button to download it. And if you press that button, it will download. You'll see it. But other than that, you might have to use a different browser. Okay, and our last question is from Alicia, and she asks, should I start conversations or introduce myself to guys, or should I wait for a guy to talk to me first? I don't think there is anything wrong with you going up to a guy and kind of dropping a hint and being like, hey, I like you, or talking to them, or introducing yourself, or anything like that. There's nothing wrong with that. Do I believe the guy should be the first one to make the move to ask you out? Yes, just because that is a standard that women should have for men, right? We should not be the ones who are pursuing the men should pursue us. So, we should not be asking them out on dates, but we can drop hints and we can say, like, hey, I really like spending time with you, or something like that, right? I don't think there's anything wrong with you introducing yourself to them. I don't think there's anything wrong with, just talking to them first. Nothing wrong with that, because guys are clueless. Honestly, they are clueless. But men, you guys also have to understand that hints are hints, and you guys can't be completely clueless 24/7. Now, if a woman's just making eye contact with you across the room and she does not make any effort to come up to you and talk to you, or if she likes a whole bunch of your tweets and you don't reach out to her, anyone on Twitter knows exactly what I'm talking about. That's ridiculous. Women, you guys need to do a little bit better in dropping hints, okay? Guys, you also cannot be completely clueless. It's a tricky situation at times, but it really just comes down to social cues, and that's not really too difficult to figure out once you get the hang of it. But yeah, I don't see there being any problem with you introducing yourself first, talking to a guy first, anything like that, but they should be pursuing you for a relationship, not the other way around, because that's just disordered. And with all of that being said, guys, I'm cutting this one short just because it is so long already because of my testimony, but I hope you enjoyed, and I will talk to you guys in the next video. Bye!